I should have turned back the moment I saw Graymore rising from the mist like a tomb. But I was 23, alone in the world, and desperation has a way of silencing instinct. The carriage that brought me from the village had been silent as a hearse, the driver offering no conversation, no warning. Only a sidelong glance when he deposited my trunk at the iron gate and drove away before I could pay him. I stood there in the October drizzle, my coat already soaked through, staring up at the mansion that would become my prison, though I did not know it yet. The stone was dark, almost black with moisture, and the windows reflected nothing but gray sky. Ivy crawled up the eastern wall like grasping fingers, and somewhere in the distance I heard the cry of a crow, sharp and accusing. I am not a woman given to superstition. My father raised me on mathematics and literature, on reason and the conviction that education could transcend the limitations of birth. When he died, leaving me with nothing but his books and a letter of reference from a vicar who pitied me, I told myself that governessing was not a fall from grace, but a practical step toward independence. I believed, in those first hopeful weeks of searching for a position, that I could make a difference in some child's life, that my learning might be a gift I could pass on. But as I pulled the iron bell at Graymore's entrance and heard it echo through what sounded like endless corridors, I felt the first cold finger of doubt trace down my spine. The door opened, not by a butler or housekeeper as I had expected, but by a thin woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled so tightly back it seemed to stretch her face into a mask. She looked at me without warmth, without welcome, and I had the strange impression that she had been standing just behind the door, waiting, listening for the bell. "You must be Miss Ashford," she said, and her voice was as dry as old paper. "I am Mrs. Brennan. I manage the household. You are expected, though I will tell you now that His Grace keeps particular hours and particular rules. You will do well to remember them." I stepped inside, my sodden hem dragging across marble that had been polished to a mirror shine. The entrance hall was vast, cold despite the season, and lit by a single chandelier that hung so high above us it seemed like a distant constellation. A grand staircase swept upward into shadow, and I counted 2 landings before the darkness swallowed the rest. There were portraits on the walls, severe men and pale women in clothing from decades past, all of them watching me with expressions that ranged from suspicion to outright disdain. I felt small beneath their gaze, insignificant, as though I had intruded upon a place where I did not belong and never would. Mrs. Brennan did not offer to help with my trunk. A boy appeared from some hidden door, perhaps 12 years old, with eyes too large for his thin face. He took my luggage without a word and disappeared again, and I followed the housekeeper up the main staircase, my heart beating harder with every step. The air smelled of beeswax and something older, something I could not name. Dust, perhaps, or the accumulated silence of years. "You will have the room in the east wing, Mrs." Brennan said as we climbed to the 2nd floor. "Your duties will begin tomorrow morning. His Grace will meet with you this evening to discuss the particulars of the position. Though I will tell you now, Miss Ashford, that the child you have been engaged to teach is not what you may have been led to expect." I paused on the landing, breathless from the climb and from the strangeness of her words. "What do you mean?" I asked. "The advertisement mentioned a young child in need of basic education." I assumed— "Assumptions are dangerous here," Mrs. Brennan interrupted, and her tone was sharp enough to cut. "You will learn that soon enough. For now, settle yourself in your room and do not wander. Dinner will be brought to you at 7. His Grace will send for you when he is ready." She led me down a corridor lined with closed doors, each one identical to the next, and stopped before the last. This one was slightly ajar, revealing a small room with a narrow bed, a washstand, a desk, and a single window that looked out over the grounds. It was clean, austere, and utterly without comfort. I thanked her, though I do not know why, and she left without another word, her footsteps fading into the silence of the house. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to steady myself. I told myself that all great houses had their eccentricities, their strange hierarchies and unspoken rules. I told myself that I would adapt, that I had no choice but to adapt, and that the child I had come to teach would need my patience and my care, whatever difficulties Mrs. Brennan had hinted at. But as the afternoon light dimmed and the shadows grew longer in my little room, I could not shake the feeling that I had made a terrible mistake. At 7, a maid brought a tray with cold meat, bread, and weak tea. She did not meet my eyes, did not speak, and I did not press her. I ate alone, listening to the silence of Graymoor settle around me like a heavy cloak. And when I finished, I tried to read by candlelight, but the words blurred and my thoughts wandered. Somewhere below me, I heard a door close. Somewhere above me, I heard what might have been footsteps, slow and deliberate, crossing a floor I could not see. It was nearly 9 when Mrs. Brennan returned and told me His Grace would see me now. I followed her back down the corridor, down the grand staircase, and through a maze of hallways until we reached a set of double doors carved with intricate patterns of leaves and thorns. She knocked once, waited, and then opened the door without waiting for a reply. The study was cavernous, lined floor to ceiling with books, and dominated by a massive fireplace where a low fire burned. The man standing before it had his back to me, his hands clasped behind him, his shoulders rigid beneath a dark coat. He did not turn when I entered, and for a long moment I simply stood there, uncertain whether I should speak or wait. Mrs. Brennan cleared her throat. "Miss Ashford, Your Grace." He turned then, slowly, and I saw his face for the first time. He was perhaps 35, though grief and something darker had carved lines around his mouth and eyes that made him seem older. His hair was black, his eyes a pale gray that seemed to look through me rather than at me, and there was a severity in his expression that made my breath catch. He was not handsome in any conventional sense, but there was a magnetism to him, a presence that filled the room and demanded attention even as he gave nothing in return. "Miss Ashford," he said, and his voice was low, rough, as though he had not used it in some time. "You come highly recommended by Reverend Talbot. He says you are intelligent, disciplined, and discreet. I hope he is correct on all 3 counts." I curtsied, though it felt absurd in that cold, silent room. "I will do my best to meet your expectations, Your Grace." He did not smile. "Expectations are a luxury I no longer indulge," he said. "You are here to provide instruction to a child who has been kept from society for reasons that do not concern you. You will teach reading, writing, arithmetic, and whatever moral instruction you deem appropriate. You will do so in the schoolroom on the 2nd floor, during the hours I designate. You will not ask questions about the child's history, the child's family, or the circumstances that have brought you here. Do I make myself clear?" I swallowed against the tightness in my throat. "Yes, Your Grace." "Good. You may begin tomorrow at 10. Mrs. Brennan will show you to the schoolroom." He turned back to the fire, dismissing me without another word, and I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of his indifference like a stone in my chest. But as I turned to leave, he spoke again, and his voice was quieter, almost uncertain. "Miss Ashford?" I paused, looking back at him. "Yes, Your Grace? There are parts of this house that are not open to you. The 3rd floor in particular is locked and will remain so. You are not to attempt to go there. You are not to ask the servants about it. You are not to concern yourself with it in any way. Do you understand?" I hesitated, unease prickling along my skin. "I understand, Your Grace, though Do you understand?" he repeated. And this time, there was something almost desperate in his tone, something that made me look at him more closely. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, and in his eyes I saw not anger, but something that looked terribly like fear. "I understand," I said softly. He nodded, and the moment passed. "Mrs. Brennan will see you out." I left the study with my heart pounding, and as Mrs. Brennan led me back through the darkened hallways to my room, I could not stop thinking about the way he had looked at me, the way his voice had cracked when he spoke of the third floor. What could possibly be up there that would frighten a man like him? What secret was so terrible that even the mention of it required such a warning? I did not sleep well that night. The bed was hard, the room was cold, and every creak of the house seemed magnified in the darkness. I lay awake, listening to the wind rattle the window panes and the rain tap against the glass. And I tried not to think about locked doors and forbidden floors and the Duke's hollow, haunted eyes. It was past midnight when I heard it for the first time. A sound so faint I thought at first I had imagined it, a trick of the wind or the settling of old wood. But as I held my breath and listened, it came again, clearer this time, unmistakable. A voice, high and sweet, singing a lullaby in the darkness. It was a child's voice, fragile and pure, and it was coming from somewhere above me. I sat up in bed, my pulse racing. The third floor. It had to be the third floor. I listened as the song continued, a melody I did not recognize, the words too muffled to make out, but the tone achingly sad. It went on for perhaps 2 minutes, and then it stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving only silence and the sound of my own breathing. I sat there in the dark for a long time, staring up at the ceiling, and I knew with absolute certainty that the child I had been hired to teach was not in the schoolroom on the second floor. The child was locked away in the attic, alone and singing to the night, and the Duke had begged me not to look for the key. But I knew even then that I would. Morning came gray and reluctant, the kind of dawn that barely distinguishes itself from night. I dressed in my plainest gown, pinned my hair with shaking fingers, and tried to prepare myself for whatever strangeness awaited me in the schoolroom. But nothing could have prepared me for the emptiness. Mrs. Brennan led me there at precisely 10 o'clock, her footsteps echoing through the corridor as we climbed to the second floor. She opened a door near the center of the hallway and gestured me inside without explanation, without comfort, and when I stepped across the threshold, she closed the door behind me and left me alone. The schoolroom was large, well-appointed, and utterly devoid of life. A desk sat before the window, arranged with fresh paper, ink, and pens. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with primers and fairy tales and volumes of poetry. There was a globe on a stand, a slate and chalk, even a small pianoforte in the corner. Everything a governess might need to educate a young child. Everything except the child itself. I stood there for 10 minutes, then 20, waiting for a student who did not come. I paced the room, examined the books, looked out the window at the grounds below, where fog clung to the gardens like something alive. I told myself there had been a misunderstanding, that perhaps the child was ill, that Mrs. Brennan would return with an explanation. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, I felt the absurdity of my situation settle over me like a weight. I had been hired to teach a ghost. At noon, the same silent maid from the previous evening brought me a tray with bread and cheese. I tried to speak to her, to ask where the child was, but she only shook her head and hurried away as though my questions were somehow dangerous. I ate alone at the desk, staring at the empty chair across from me, and the silence pressed against my ears until I thought I might scream. The afternoon was no different. I sat at the desk and attempted to plan lessons for a student I had never met, whose age I did not know, whose abilities were a complete mystery. I wrote out simple sentences on the slate, arranged the primers in order of difficulty, and all the while I felt the weight of the house watching me, waiting to see what I would do. By 4 o'clock, when Mrs. Brennan returned to tell me my duties were finished for the day, I was trembling with frustration and confusion. "I need to speak with His Grace," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "There has been some mistake. I have been sitting in an empty room all day. Where is the child I was engaged to teach?" Mrs. Brennan's expression did not change. "His Grace is occupied. You will continue as instructed, tomorrow at 10. "But there is no one here," I insisted, standing now, my hands gripping the edge of the desk. How can I teach when there is no student? What is the purpose of this? For the first time, something flickered in her eyes, something that might have been pity or might have been warning. You were told not to ask questions, Miss Ashford. I suggest you remember that. His Grace does not tolerate disobedience. She left before I could respond, and I was alone again in the schoolroom, with only the fading light and my own racing thoughts for company. I wanted to leave, to pack my trunk and walk down the drive and never look back. But I had nowhere to go, no family to return to, and only 3 shillings to my name. I was trapped at Graymore as surely as if I had been locked in the attic myself. That evening I took dinner in my room again, and afterward I sat by the window watching darkness settle over the grounds. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained heavy with clouds, and there was no moon, no stars, only an oppressive blackness that seemed to seep into the very walls. I tried to read, but I could not concentrate. I tried to write a letter to Reverend Talbot, but what could I say? That I had been hired under false pretenses? That the household was strange beyond reason? That I feared something terrible was hidden in this house, and I did not know whether I had the courage to uncover it? I set down my pen and closed my eyes, and that was when I heard it again. The lullaby, soft and mournful, drifting down from somewhere above. I stood and moved to the center of the room, tilting my head back, listening. It was the same voice as the night before, the same melody. But this time I could make out a few of the words. Hush now, my darling. Do not cry. Mama will sing until the morning comes. Sleep now, my sweet one. Close your eyes. My heart broke at the sound of it. There was such loneliness in that voice, such longing. And I knew beyond any doubt that somewhere in this house a child was suffering, hidden away and forgotten. The Duke had commanded me not to look, not to ask, not to concern myself. But how could I not? How could anyone with a beating heart hear that song and turn away? I left my room before I could second-guess myself. The corridor was dark, lit only by a single candle in a sconce near the stairs, and I moved as quietly as I could toward the sound. The singing grew louder as I climbed, and I realized I was heading toward the 3rd floor, toward the very place I had been forbidden to go. My hands were shaking as I reached the upper landing, and I paused there in the darkness, listening. The song had stopped. I waited, barely breathing, and then I heard something else. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, coming from the corridor behind me. I turned, my pulse hammering, and saw the Duke emerging from the shadows like an apparition. He was still dressed in his dark coat, his face as severe as it had been in the study, but there was something different in his expression now. He looked exhausted, hollowed out, as though he had not slept in weeks. "Miss Ashford," he said, and his voice was cold. "I believe I made myself clear yesterday. This floor is forbidden." I lifted my chin, summoning what little courage I had left. I heard singing, "Your Grace," a child's voice. I thought perhaps someone was in distress. You thought wrong. "Then where is the child I was hired to teach?" I demanded, anger overriding caution. "I have spent an entire day in an empty schoolroom. I have received no instruction, no explanation, nothing but silence and evasion. If you will not allow me to do the work I was engaged for, then why am I here at all?" He took a step closer, and I saw something flicker in his eyes, something that might have been pain. "You are here," he said quietly, "because I need you to be, and that is all the explanation you will receive." I stared at him, bewildered. What does that mean? He turned away, his shoulders rigid. "Go back to your room, Miss Ashford. Forget what you heard. Forget you were ever on this floor." "I cannot forget," I said, and my voice broke despite myself. "I cannot sit in that schoolroom day after day knowing that a child is suffering somewhere in this house. If you have any compassion at all—" "Compassion," he interrupted, and he laughed, a short, bitter sound. Compassion is what brought us to this place, Miss Ashford. Compassion is what destroyed everything I loved. Do not speak to me of compassion. He walked past me toward the stairs, and I thought he would leave, but he paused on the top step and looked back at me. His face was half in shadow, but I saw the anguish there, raw and undisguised. If you care for the child as much as you claim, he said softly, you will do as I ask. You will stay away from this floor. You will ask no more questions. Because the moment you open that door, the moment you bring the truth into the light, everything will change, and I cannot protect you from what will follow. He descended the stairs before I could respond, and I was left alone in the darkness with his words echoing in my mind. I stood there for a long time, torn between fear and determination. And then I returned to my room and lay awake until dawn, listening for the lullaby that did not come again. The next day followed the same pattern. The empty schoolroom, the silent maid, the oppressive loneliness. But this time, I did not sit passively at the desk. I began to explore the room more carefully, looking for anything that might give me answers. I examined the books on the shelves and found inscriptions on the flyleaves. To Mama, with love, for my dearest girl. Some of them were dated 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and I realized they must have belonged to someone who had lived in this house long before I arrived. In the drawer of the desk, I found a small wooden box, and inside it a collection of letters tied with a ribbon. They were old, the paper yellowed and fragile, and they were addressed to Lady Catherine Ashworth. I knew I should not read them, that they were private, but I could not stop myself. I untied the ribbon and unfolded the first letter, and my breath caught as I read. My dearest Catherine, it began. I write to you in the hope that one day you will forgive me for the choice I am about to make. I know you believe I am abandoning you, abandoning our child, but you must understand that I have no choice. Society will never accept what we have done, and if I remain, I will only bring more shame upon your name. I am leaving England tonight, and I do not know when I shall return. Please tell our daughter that her father loved her, even if he could not stay to watch her grow. Please forgive me, if you can. The letter was unsigned, but the implication was clear. Lady Catherine had borne a child out of wedlock, and the father had fled rather than face the scandal. I looked through the other letters and found more of the same, declarations of love and apologies, promises that were never kept. The final letter was different, written in a different hand, and it was dated 5 years ago. Catherine, it read, I have heard of your passing, and I am sorry I was not there to comfort you. I pray that the child is safe and that you have found peace at last. But I could not bring myself to return. The weight of my shame is too great. May God forgive us both. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. Lady Catherine must have been the Duke's wife, or perhaps his sister. And the child, the one locked away on the 3rd floor, must be hers. A child born of scandal, hidden from the world to protect the family's reputation. But why keep the child locked away now, years after Lady Catherine's death? What purpose could it serve except to compound the cruelty? I thought of the lullaby I had heard, the desperate loneliness in that small voice, and I felt something harden inside me. I had come to Graymore expecting to be a governess, but I realized now that I had been brought here for a different purpose entirely. The Duke wanted someone to sit in that empty schoolroom day after day to provide the appearance of care while the real child remained hidden. He wanted a witness to his guilt, or perhaps a barrier between himself and the truth he could not face. But I would not be that person. I would not be complicit in this cruelty, no matter what threats he made. That night I waited until the house was silent, and then I crept out of my room with a candle in my hand. I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, moving slowly, carefully, listening for any sound that might betray another presence. The corridor was long and narrow, lined with doors that were all closed, all locked, and at the very end, I saw a single door that looked different from the rest. It was heavier, reinforced with iron bands, and there was no keyhole, only a bolt on the outside. I approached it with my heart in my throat, and I stood there for a long moment, my hand hovering over the bolt. I thought of the Duke's warning, his desperate plea to leave the truth buried. I thought of the consequences I might face if I disobeyed him. But then I thought of the child singing in the darkness, and I knew I had no choice. I pulled back the bolt, and the sound of it sliding free seemed impossibly loud in the silence. I pushed the door open, and the hinges creaked in protest, and I stepped into the room beyond with my candle held high. What I saw there stole the breath from my lungs and changed everything I thought I knew about Graymore, about the Duke, and about the terrible secret he had been keeping all these years. The room was not a prison. That was the first shock, the first thing that shattered my expectations. I had imagined chains, bars, darkness, all the horrors that my imagination had conjured during those long nights of listening to that mournful lullaby. But what I found instead was a child's bedroom, carefully appointed, almost luxurious in its furnishings. There was a canopied bed with white linens, a rocking horse by the window, shelves of dolls and toys, and wallpaper decorated with delicate flowers. A fire burned low in the grate, casting warm shadows across the floor, and by that fire, seated in a small chair with a book in her lap, was a little girl. She looked up when I entered, and I saw her face clearly in the candlelight. She could not have been more than 7 years old, with dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders and eyes that were the same pale gray as the Duke's. She was beautiful, achingly so, but there was something in her expression that broke my heart. She looked at me without surprise, without fear, only with a kind of weary resignation, as though she had long ago stopped expecting anything from the world beyond this room. I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to speak, unable to process what I was seeing. This was not neglect, not in the way I had imagined. The child was clean, well dressed in a fine gown of blue velvet. Her hair had been brushed, her face was healthy, and yet there was something profoundly wrong about the scene before me. She was a bird in a gilded cage, and the cage was all she had ever known. "Hello," the child said, and her voice was the same one I had heard singing in the darkness, sweet and clear and impossibly sad. "Are you the new governess?" I found my voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Yes. Yes, I am Miss Ashford. What is your name?" She tilted her head, considering me. "Mama called me Catherine," she said. "But Papa will not say my name. He calls me nothing at all. Catherine, Lady Catherine's daughter, the child born of scandal, the living reminder of a love that had destroyed a family's reputation." I stepped into the room and closed the door behind me, my legs unsteady beneath me. "How long have you been in this room, Catherine?" She shrugged, a gesture far too old for her years. "Always," she said. "I was born here, I think. Or I have been here so long I do not remember anywhere else. Mrs. Brennan brings me meals. Sometimes she stays and talks to me. Sometimes she reads to me, but mostly I am alone." I crossed the room and knelt before her chair, looking into those gray eyes that held such sadness. "Does your father ever visit you?" Her expression did not change. "He comes sometimes, late at night when he thinks I am sleeping. He stands in the doorway and looks at me, but he never speaks. I think he is afraid of me." My throat tightened. "Why would he be afraid of you?" Catherine closed her book and set it aside. "Because I look like Mama," she said simply. "Because when he sees me, he remembers what happened, and remembering hurts him." I reached out and took her small hand in mine, and I felt tears prick at my eyes. "You should not be locked away like this," I said. "You are a child. You deserve to play in the gardens, to run and laugh and feel the sun on your face. This is not right." She looked down at our joined hands. "I know," she said quietly, "but Papa says the world would not understand. He says people would be cruel to me because of how I was born. He says I am safer here, where no one can hurt me. The world can be cruel, I admitted, but hiding from it will not make you happy. And you have done nothing wrong, Catherine. You are innocent in all of this. She looked up at me then, and I saw a spark of something in her eyes, something that might have been hope. Do you truly believe that? I do, with all my heart. We sat together in the firelight, and she told me about her life in that room. She told me about the books she had read, the songs her mother had taught her before she died, the dolls she played with, and the stories she invented to pass the endless hours. She told me about the nights when she could hear music from the ballroom below, when guests came to Graymore for parties she was never allowed to attend. She told me about the loneliness, the aching emptiness of days that blurred together into years, and as I listened, I felt my anger toward the Duke harden into something cold and implacable. What he had done to this child, what he continued to do, was unconscionable. I did not care about his grief, his shame, his fear of society's judgment. He was condemning an innocent girl to a half-life, to an existence devoid of joy and connection, and I would not stand by and let it continue. Not now that I knew the truth. I stayed with Catherine until she began to yawn, and then I helped her into bed and tucked the blankets around her. She looked up at me with such trust, such longing for kindness, that I had to turn away to hide my tears. I will come back, I promised her. I will not leave you alone again. Thank you, Miss Ashford, she whispered. I have been waiting so long for someone to find me. I left the room and bolted the door behind me, though every instinct screamed against it, and then I descended the stairs with my heart pounding and my mind racing. I went directly to the Duke's study, not caring that it was past midnight, not caring about propriety or caution. I knocked once, hard, and when there was no answer, I opened the door myself. He was there, standing by the window with a glass of brandy in his hand, and he turned when I entered. His face was haggard in the firelight, and I saw that he had been crying. The realization stopped me for a moment, softened my anger just slightly, but then I thought of Catherine alone in that room, and my resolve returned. I found her, I said, my voice shaking. I found your daughter. He closed his eyes. I know. I heard the bolt. She is 7 years old. 7. And you have kept her locked in that room her entire life. How dare you? How dare you treat a child, your own child, with such cruelty? You do not understand, he said, and his voice was thick with pain. You cannot understand. Then make me understand, I demanded. Tell me why you would do this to an innocent girl. Tell me what possible justification you could have for this monstrous act. He turned away from me, his shoulders shaking. Because I loved her mother, he said, so quietly I almost did not hear. Because Catherine was my sister, and I loved her more than my own life, and when she bore a child out of wedlock, when she begged me to protect that child from the world's judgment, I swore I would. I swore I would keep her safe, no matter the cost. I stared at him, trying to process his words. Catherine was your sister? He nodded, still facing away from me. She was younger than me by 10 years, beautiful, spirited, everything I was not. She fell in love with a man far beneath her station, a musician who played at one of her friends' parties. I warned her against it. I told her it could only end in heartbreak. But she did not listen. They met in secret for months, and when she realized she was with child, he fled. He abandoned her to face the scandal alone. And the child? She was born here, in this house. Catherine made me promise that I would never send her away, never let society know of her existence. She said the child was all she had left of the man she loved, and she could not bear to have her taken away. So I agreed. I kept the secret. I told the world that Catherine had gone abroad for her health, and when she died in childbirth, I told them she had passed away in Italy. No one questioned it. No one knew there was a child. He turned to face me then, and I saw the agony in his eyes. But Catherine lingered for 3 days after the birth, he continued. Long enough to name her daughter after herself. Long enough to beg me to raise her, to love her, to give her a life. And I tried. God knows I tried. But every time I looked at that child, I saw my sister's face. I saw the love that had destroyed her. I saw the scandal that would have ruined us both if the truth had come out. And I could not bear it. So you locked her away, I said, and my voice was cold. You kept your promise to protect her, but you did not keep your promise to give her a life. You have made her a prisoner, Your Grace. You have stolen her childhood, her innocence, her chance at happiness. And no amount of grief or fear can justify that. He flinched as though I had struck him. I know, he whispered. I know what I have done. I see it every day in her eyes when I dare to look at her. I hear it in her voice when she sings those songs her mother taught her. But I do not know how to undo it. Society would destroy her if they knew the truth. They would call her a bastard, a shame, a stain on the family name. How can I protect her from that? By giving her the tools to face it, I said. By raising her with love and strength and the knowledge that she is worthy, regardless of how she was born. By allowing her to be a child, to know joy and friendship and the world beyond that room. You cannot keep her locked away forever, Your Grace. One day she will grow up, and she will resent you for this. She will hate you for stealing the only life she will ever have. He sank into a chair and buried his face in his hands. I am already too late, he said. The damage is done. She has lived 7 years in that room. How can I possibly make amends for that? I moved closer to him, and despite my anger, I felt a flicker of compassion. You begin by opening the door, I said quietly. You begin by acknowledging your mistake and choosing differently. It will not be easy. It will not erase the past. But it is the only path forward. He looked up at me, and I saw tears on his cheeks. You speak as though it were simple. It is not simple, but it is right. We sat in silence for a long moment, the fire crackling between us, and I saw the war playing out in his expression. Fear and guilt and longing all tangled together, and beneath it all a desperate desire to do what was right, if only he could find the courage. I wanted to hate him for what he had done, but I found I could not. He was a man drowning in grief, paralyzed by the weight of impossible choices, and in that moment I saw not a monster, but a broken soul in need of redemption. If I allow her out of that room, he said finally, if I bring her into the household, the servants will talk. Word will spread. The scandal will destroy us both. Then we will be destroyed, I said, but Catherine will be free, and that is worth any price. He stood and walked to the window, staring out into the darkness. I am afraid, he admitted. I am afraid I will fail her as I failed her mother. I am afraid I will not be the father she deserves. Then let me help you, I said. Let me teach her, guide her, give her the education and care she needs. Let me be the bridge between you and the daughter you have been too frightened to know. You do not have to do this alone. He turned and looked at me, and for the first time since I had arrived at Graymore, I saw something other than coldness in his eyes. I saw vulnerability and need and the faintest glimmer of hope. Why would you do this? He asked. You owe us nothing. You could leave tomorrow and find a position elsewhere, somewhere without all this darkness and sorrow. Why would you stay? I thought of Catherine's face in the firelight, of the way she had looked at me with such desperate trust. I thought of the lullaby I had heard in the darkness, the lonely voice of a child who had no one. Because she deserves better, I said simply. And because, despite everything, I believe you do too. He crossed the room then, and he took my hand in his, and the touch sent a shock through me that I did not expect. His hand was warm, his grip gentle, and when he spoke, His voice was raw with emotion. "Thank you, Miss Ashford. I do not deserve your kindness, but I am grateful for it nonetheless. We will begin tomorrow," I said. "I will bring Catherine to the schoolroom, and you will visit her there. You will speak to her, spend time with her. Learn to see her not as a reminder of your sister's tragedy, but as a person in her own right. It will be difficult, but it is necessary." He nodded, and I saw a flicker of determination in his expression. "Tomorrow, then." I left him standing there in his study, and as I climbed the stairs to my room, I felt the weight of what I had just committed to. I had taken on the care of a traumatized child and the redemption of a broken man, and I did not know if I had the strength for either. But I also knew that I could not turn away. Not now. Not when Catherine needed me. Not when the Duke, for all his faults, was reaching for a chance at salvation. That night, I did not hear the lullaby. The house was silent, and I imagined Catherine sleeping peacefully in her room, perhaps dreaming of a future that held more than 4 walls and a locked door. I lay awake and stared at the ceiling, and I wondered what would come next. I wondered if the Duke would truly have the courage to change, or if fear would win in the end. I wondered if society would discover the truth and condemn us all. But most of all, I wondered at the strange connection I had felt when he took my hand, the way my heart had raced at his touch, and I knew with a kind of quiet certainty that my time at Graymore had become about more than just saving a child. It had become about saving us all. The next morning arrived with pale sunlight struggling through the clouds, and I woke with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. Today would determine everything. Today the Duke would either find the courage to face his daughter, or fear would drive him back into the darkness he had created for them both. I dressed carefully and went to Catherine's room before breakfast. She was awake already, sitting by the window with her face pressed to the glass, watching the gardens below with such longing it made my chest ache. When she heard me enter, she turned with eyes wide with hope. "Miss Ashford," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought perhaps I had dreamed last night. I thought perhaps you would not come back." I crossed the room and knelt beside her, taking her hands in mine. "I am here," I promised, "and today everything changes. You are going to leave this room, Catherine. You are going to come downstairs to the schoolroom, and your father is going to visit you there." She pulled back slightly, fear flickering across her face. "Papa? But he never speaks to me. What if he is angry that you opened the door? What if he sends you away?" "He is not angry," I said, though I was not entirely certain of that myself. "He is frightened, just as you are, but we are going to help him be brave. Will you trust me?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I trust you." I helped her dress in a simple day gown, brushed her hair until it shone, and then I took her hand and led her from the room that had been her entire world. She moved hesitantly, her steps small and uncertain, and when we reached the corridor, she stopped and stared at the space stretching before her, as though it were a vast wilderness. I had not realized until that moment how completely her imprisonment had shaped her, how the simple act of walking through a hallway would seem like an impossible journey. "It is all right," I said softly. "I am with you." We descended the stairs slowly, and I watched her face as she took in the entrance hall, the portraits, the chandelier overhead. Her eyes were wide with wonder and terror in equal measure, and when we encountered a housemaid in the corridor, Catherine shrank against me as though the girl might strike her. The maid stared at us in shock, her mouth falling open, and I met her gaze with a firm expression that brooked no questions. She hurried past without a word, but I knew the news would spread through the household like wildfire. The hidden child had emerged. The schoolroom felt different with Catherine in it. What had been an empty stage for a performance no one would watch was suddenly filled with purpose. I settled her at the desk by the window, gave her a primer to examine, and tried to appear calm even as my heart raced. The Duke had promised to come at noon. It was now 11:30, and I did not know if he would keep his word. Catherine was quiet, turning the pages of the primer with careful fingers, and I saw how hunger shone in her eyes as she looked at the words. She had been taught to read by her mother and by Mrs. Brennan, but her education had been fragmented, limited by the isolation of her existence. I sat beside her and began to guide her through a simple passage, and for a few minutes the world narrowed to just the two of us and the words on the page. Then I heard footsteps in the corridor, slow and deliberate, and I looked up to see the Duke standing in the doorway. He had dressed formally, as though preparing for an ordeal, and his face was pale beneath his dark hair. Catherine had not seen him yet. She was bent over the book, her lips moving silently as she sounded out the words, and I saw the Duke's expression crumble as he watched her. "Catherine," I said gently, "someone is here to see you." She looked up, and when she saw her father, all the color drained from her face. She stood so quickly her chair scraped against the floor, and for a moment I thought she might run. But then she simply stood there, frozen, staring at him with an expression that held both longing and fear in equal measure. The Duke took a step into the room, and I saw his hands were shaking. "Hello, Catherine," he said, and his voice was rough, as though he had not used it for speaking to her in so long he had forgotten how. "Hello, Papa," she whispered. The silence that followed was excruciating. They stood there, looking at each other across the room, two people bound by blood and tragedy, but separated by years of guilt and avoidance, and neither of them seemed to know how to bridge that distance. I realized then that I would have to do it for them. "Your father wanted to see how you are progressing with your lessons," I said, my tone deliberately light. "Would you like to show him what you have been reading?" Catherine glanced at me, and I gave her an encouraging nod. She picked up the primer with trembling hands and began to read aloud, her voice soft but clear. The Duke moved closer, pulled a chair from the corner, and sat down to listen. I saw the way he watched her, the way his eyes traced every feature of her face, and I knew he was seeing not just Catherine, but her mother, the sister he had loved and lost. When Catherine finished the passage, she looked up at him nervously. "Did I do well, Papa?" "You did beautifully," he said, and I heard the thickness in his voice. "You read better than I did at your age." A small smile flickered across Catherine's face, tentative and fragile as new ice. "Mama used to read to me every night before she died. She taught me many of the words." The mention of her mother seemed to strike him like a physical blow. He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, there were tears on his lashes. "She would be very proud of you," he said quietly. "You have her intelligence, her grace, her beautiful voice." Catherine's own eyes filled with tears. "Do I truly look like her?" He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Just like her," he finally managed. "Exactly like her." I watched them, and I felt something shift in my chest. This was what I had hoped for, this fragile beginning, but I also knew how easily it could shatter. The Duke was trying, but the weight of his guilt was immense, and Catherine was so hungry for his affection that I feared what would happen if he failed her again. We spent an hour together that day, the three of us in the schoolroom, and slowly, painfully, they began to learn how to speak to each other. The Duke asked about her favorite stories, and Catherine told him about the fairy tales she loved. He asked what she liked to do, and she admitted shyly that she liked to sing. He asked if she would sing for him, and after a long moment of hesitation, she did. Her voice filled the room, pure and heartbreaking, and when she finished, the Duke wept openly. "I am sorry," he said, the words bursting from him as though they had been locked inside for years. "I am so sorry, Catherine. I should have been a better guardian to you. I should have given you the childhood you deserved. I have failed you in every way that matters, and I do not know if you can ever forgive me." Catherine stood and crossed to him, and with a courage that humbled me, she reached out and took his hand. "You did not send me away," she said simply. "You kept me safe. That is something." He pulled her into his arms then, and she melted against him, and I turned away to give them privacy, my own tears streaming down my face. This was what redemption looked like. Messy, painful, imperfect, but real. A father and daughter trying to find each other across the wreckage of the past. In the days that followed, a new rhythm established itself at Graymore. Catherine came to the schoolroom every morning, and the Duke visited every afternoon. I taught her reading and mathematics and history, and he began to teach her about the estate, about the responsibilities of their position, about the family she had never been allowed to know. Mrs. Brennan watched it all with a mixture of relief and apprehension, and I caught her more than once looking at Catherine with an expression that suggested she had been waiting for this change for a very long time. But not everyone in the household was pleased. The servants whispered about the girl who had appeared from nowhere, and I heard rumors beginning to circulate in the village. Questions were being asked. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why had no one known of her existence? The Duke tried to dismiss the talk, but I saw the tension growing in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened whenever someone mentioned it. It was nearly 2 weeks after Catherine's emergence when the Dowager arrived. She was the Duke's aunt, a formidable woman in her 60s who had been traveling abroad and had returned to find the household in what she clearly viewed as a state of chaos. She descended upon Graymore like an avenging angel, demanded an immediate audience with her nephew, and when she learned the truth about Catherine, her fury was spectacular. I was in the schoolroom with Catherine when I heard the shouting from below. The Duke's study was directly beneath us, and his aunt's voice carried clearly through the floorboards. "You have lost your mind," she raged. "Do you have any idea what this will do to the family name? That child is a bastard, the product of your sister's shame, and you have brought her into the light for all the world to see. You might as well have announced it in the Times." Catherine had frozen at her desk, her face draining of color. I moved to her side and placed my hand on her shoulder. "Do not listen," I said quietly. "Those are just words. They cannot hurt you." "But they can hurt Papa," she whispered. I heard what she called me. Perhaps I should go back to my room. Perhaps it would be better if I disappeared again. "No," I said firmly. "You will not hide anymore. You have every right to be here, Catherine. You have done nothing wrong." The argument below intensified, and I heard the Duke's voice rise in anger. "I will not send her away," he shouted. "I will not repeat the mistake I have been making for 7 years. She is my responsibility, and I will not abandon her." "Then you are a fool," the Dowager shot back. "Society will crucify you for this. They will call you weak. They will mock you. They will say you have no control over your own household. Is that what you want? Is that the legacy you wish to leave?" "I do not care about legacy," he said, and his voice was cold. "I care about doing what is right. And it is right that Catherine should be raised in this house, acknowledged and cared for. If society cannot accept that, then society be damned." There was a long silence, and then I heard the sound of the door slamming. Footsteps echoed in the corridor below, sharp and angry, and then the front door slammed as well. The Dowager had left, but I knew this was not over. She would not accept defeat so easily. She would use every weapon at her disposal to force the Duke to change his mind, to restore what she viewed as the proper order of things. That evening, after Catherine had been put to bed, I found the Duke in his study. He was standing by the window again, his usual position when troubled, and he turned when I entered. I saw the exhaustion in his face, the weight of the battle he had just fought. "She will not let this go," he said quietly. "My aunt will spread the story throughout London. She will ensure that everyone knows about Catherine, about the scandal, about everything. She believes she is protecting the family, but all she will do is make everything worse. Then let her," I said. "Let the story spread. Let people talk. Catherine deserves to exist in the world, not in a locked room. If the price of that is gossip and judgment, then so be it." He looked at me with something like wonder. "You speak as though reputation means nothing to you." "I came from a family with no reputation to protect," I said. My father was a country schoolmaster. We lived modestly, without pretension, and we were happy. I learned early that what matters is not what society thinks of you, but what you know to be true about yourself. Catherine is innocent. You are trying to make amends. That is all that should matter. He crossed to where I stood and took my hands in his, just as he had that first night. But this time, there was something different in his touch, something warmer, more personal. "You have changed everything, Miss Ashford," he said softly. "You have given me the courage to face what I could not face alone. You have brought light into this house, into my life, and I do not know how to thank you." My heart was racing, my skin warm where his hands touched mine. "You do not need to thank me," I said. "I am only doing what anyone with compassion would do." "No," he said, and he moved closer. So close I could feel the warmth of him. "Not anyone. You. You saw the darkness in this house, and you did not run from it. You saw my failures, and you did not judge me. You saw Catherine, and you loved her immediately, without reservation. That is not common. That is extraordinary." I looked up into his eyes, and I saw something there that made my breath catch. It was more than gratitude, more than respect. It was something deeper, more dangerous, and I knew in that moment that the connection I had felt growing between us was not one-sided. He felt it too. This impossible, inappropriate thing that neither of us had intended. "Your Grace," I began, but he shook his head. "My name is William," he said, "and when we are alone like this, I would very much like to hear you use it." "William," I repeated, and the name felt intimate on my lips. "This is not proper. I am your employee. You are a duke. There is a vast distance between us." "Distance can be crossed," he said, "if both people are willing to try." He lifted one hand and traced his fingers along my jaw, and the touch sent shivers through me. I knew I should step back, should remind him of the impropriety, should think of Catherine and the fragile peace we had built. But I did not move. I stood there in the firelight with his hand against my face, and I let myself feel what I had been trying to deny for days. I was falling in love with him, with this broken, grieving man who was trying so hard to be better than he had been, with this duke who had wept for his failures and fought for his daughter's right to exist. "William," I said again, and this time it was a plea. "What are we doing?" "I do not know," he admitted, "but I know that I do not want to stop." He leaned closer, and I thought he might kiss me, but at the last moment he pulled back and released my hands. "Forgive me," he said, his voice rough. "That was inappropriate. You came here to help Catherine, not to endure my attentions." "It was not unwelcome," I said quietly, and I saw surprise flash in his eyes. We stood there in the silence, the fire crackling between us, and I knew that something had fundamentally shifted. We had crossed a line, acknowledged something that could not be unacknowledged, and there was no going back. Whatever came next, whether scandal or salvation, we would face it together. And as I left his study and climbed the stairs to my room, I realized that I had not just come to Graymore to save a child. I had come to save myself as well, to find purpose, to find courage, to find love in the last place I had ever expected it. In the heart of a man who had thought himself beyond redemption, and in a house that had seemed like nothing but darkness. But darkness, I had learned, was only the absence of light, and light could always be kindled if someone was brave enough to strike the match. The scandal broke 3 days later, exactly as the Dowager had promised. It came in whispers at first, reaching us through the servants who had been to the village, through the tradesmen who delivered goods to the house. A bastard child living at Graymore. The Duke had lost his senses. The family name was in ruins. By the end of the week, the whispers had become shouts, and letters began arriving, each one more venomous than the last. I stood in the morning room with the Duke as he read through them, watching his face darken with each new condemnation. His peers questioned his judgment. His business associates withdrew their invitations. Even the vicar, who had sent me to this position with such glowing recommendations, wrote to express his deep disappointment in the Duke's choices. Society had turned against us with the swift brutality of a pack descending on wounded prey, and there was no defense that would satisfy them. We had violated the unspoken rules, brought shame into the light, and for that we would be punished. "Catherine knows," I said quietly. She heard the servants talking. She asked me this morning if she should leave, if her presence was causing too much trouble. William looked up from the letters, his jaw tight. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that anyone who judges a child for circumstances beyond her control is not worth our concern. I told her that she belongs here, and that we will weather this storm together." He set the letters aside and came to stand beside me at the window. We were watching Catherine in the garden below, accompanied by Mrs. Brennan. It was the first time she had been allowed outside in 7 years, and despite everything, despite the scandal raging around us, she looked almost radiant. The November sun caught in her dark hair, and she was running, actually running, chasing fallen leaves and laughing at the wind. "Look at her," William said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "That is what freedom looks like. That is what I stole from her for so long. How can I regret giving it back to her now, no matter what it costs us?" I placed my hand over his on the windowsill. "You cannot," I said, "and you should not." He turned to me then, and I saw the war still raging in his eyes. "But what of you, Emma?" he asked, using my given name for the first time. "You will be destroyed by association with this household. Your reputation will be in tatters. You will never find another position as a governess. What future can you possibly have here?" I had asked myself the same question 100 times since the scandal broke. I had lain awake at night weighing my options, considering what it would mean to stay at Graymore versus seeking employment elsewhere. But every time I imagined leaving, every time I pictured walking away from Catherine and from William, something inside me rebelled. I had found something here that I had not even known I was searching for. Purpose, yes, but also belonging. Also love. "I have the future I choose," I said. "And I choose this. I choose Catherine. I choose you. I choose standing against the judgment of people who value reputation more than compassion. If that means I never work as a governess again, then so be it. There are other ways to make a life." He took both my hands in his, and I saw tears on his face. "I do not deserve you," he said. "I do not deserve your loyalty or your courage or your faith in me. But God help me, Emma. I need you. I need you more than I have ever needed anyone." "Then you have me," I whispered, "for as long as you want me." "I want you forever," he said, and the words hung in the air between us, enormous and undeniable. "I want to marry you. I want to make you my duchess. I want Catherine to have not just a governess, but a mother, someone who will love her unconditionally and fight for her happiness. I know it is madness. I know society will condemn us even more thoroughly than they already have. But I also know that I love you, Emma Ashford. And I cannot imagine facing what comes next without you by my side." My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. "You love me?" "From the moment you defied me and opened that door," he said. "From the moment you stood in my study and demanded I be a better man. You saw the worst of me, the darkest parts of my soul, and you did not turn away. How could I not love you?" I reached up and touched his face, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath my fingers. "I love you too," I said. "I think I have loved you since that first night when I saw the fear in your eyes and realized you were not a monster, but a man drowning in grief. I love your courage, your capacity for change, your devotion to Catherine. I love who you are becoming, William. And yes, I will marry you." He pulled me into his arms then, and he kissed me, and it was nothing like I had imagined. It was not gentle or tentative. It was desperate, fierce, a drowning man clutching at salvation. I kissed him back with equal fervor, and for those few moments the world fell away. There was no scandal, no judgment, no fear. There was only this connection between us, this love that had been forged in darkness and tested by fire. When we finally pulled apart, both of us breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. "We will face them together," he said. "Whatever comes, whatever they say. We will stand together, and we will not apologize for choosing love over their approval." Together, I agreed. The following week brought the Dowager back to Graymore, this time accompanied by several other family members who had heard the news and come to add their voices to the chorus of disapproval. They assembled in the drawing room like a tribunal, and William and I faced them with Catherine standing between us, her small hand gripping mine. The Dowager's expression was triumphant, vindictive. "I told you this would happen," she said to William. "I warned you that bringing that child into the open would destroy us. And now you compound your error by announcing your engagement to a governess. Have you completely lost your senses?" "No," William said calmly. "I have found them. For the first time in 7 years, I am thinking clearly. I am choosing what is right over what is convenient. I am choosing love over fear. And if that means I am cast out of society, then I accept that consequence gladly." "You speak of love," one of his cousins sneered, "but what you have done is disgraceful. That child is a stain on our family. She should have been sent away, placed with a respectable family in the country where no one would know her origins. Instead, you parade her about as though she has every right to be here." "She does have every right," I said, my voice ringing out clear and strong. "She is a child, an innocent child who has suffered enough for the sins of adults. If you cannot see that, if you cannot find it in your hearts to show her compassion, then you are the ones who should be ashamed, not her." The room fell silent, and I felt Catherine's hand tighten in mine. I looked down at her and saw tears on her cheeks, but she held her head high, and I was proud of her courage. She had lived 7 years in isolation, and now she stood before these people who despised her, and she did not cower. She had learned in these few short weeks of freedom that she was worthy of dignity. The Dowager stood, her face flushed with anger. "Then you have made your choice," she said to William, "and you will live with the consequences. Do not expect any support from this family. Do not expect invitations to our homes or assistance in your affairs. You have chosen these two over your own blood, and we will remember that." They left in a flurry of rustling skirts and indignant muttering, and when the door closed behind them, William let out a long breath. "Well," he said, "that went as well as could be expected." Catherine looked up at him with wide eyes. "Are we truly alone now, Papa?" she asked. "Has everyone abandoned us?" He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Not everyone," he said gently. "We have each other. And we have Miss Ashford, who will soon be your new mother if you will accept her. That is more than enough." Catherine turned to me, her expression uncertain. "Would you truly want to be my mother?" she asked. "Even though I am not really your daughter? Even though people will say terrible things about you?" I knelt beside William and took her other hand. "I would be honored to be your mother," I said. "I already love you as though you were my own, and people can say what they like. Their words cannot change what is true in our hearts." She threw her arms around my neck and buried her face against my shoulder, and I held her while she cried, relief and joy and residual fear all mingling together. William wrapped his arms around both of us, and we stayed there on the floor of the drawing room, the three of us holding each other. And I knew that we had just become a family in the truest sense, not by blood or law, but by choice, by love. The months that followed were difficult. The scandal did not fade as we had hoped. Letters continued to arrive, each more cutting than the last. Invitations dried up completely. Tradesmen became reluctant to serve us, and we had to travel farther afield for basic necessities. But we also discovered unexpected allies. The vicar's wife, a kind woman who had always been more practical than her husband, came to call and offered her support. Several of the tenant families on the estate sent letters expressing their loyalty, and Mrs. Brennan, who had carried the secret of Catherine's existence for so many years, wept with relief that the child was finally free. William and I were married in a small ceremony in the village church, with Catherine as our only attendant. She wore a new dress of pale blue, her hair adorned with winter flowers, and she glowed with happiness. The church was nearly empty. Most of our invitations had been declined, but those who came, those few who chose compassion over judgment, were enough. They were more than enough. Our wedding night was spent not in some grand celebration, but in the quiet intimacy of Greymore's master chambers, which I now shared with my husband. William held me with a tenderness that spoke of reverence and need in equal measure. And when he made love to me, it was with the passion of a man who had been lost and now found himself home. I gave myself to him completely, without reservation, and in the morning when I woke beside him, I felt a peace I had never known before. Catherine blossomed in her freedom. She spent her mornings in lessons with me, absorbing knowledge with the hunger of someone who had been starved for intellectual stimulation. She spent her afternoons exploring the grounds, discovering the world beyond the walls that had confined her. She learned to ride, to garden, to play the pianoforte with skill that surprised us all. And most importantly, she learned to laugh. That sound, her uninhibited joy, was worth every letter of condemnation we received. William proved himself to be the father Catherine had always deserved. He was patient with her fears, celebrated her triumphs, and made it clear through word and deed that she was loved, valued, and protected. I watched him teach her to waltz in the ballroom, both of them laughing as they stumbled through the steps, and I saw the man he might have been all along if grief had not crippled him. He was kind, attentive, capable of great tenderness. He was everything I had hoped for and more. Spring came, and with it came the first signs that the scandal might eventually lose its grip. A distant cousin wrote to express cautious support. A business associate who had withdrawn his friendship tentatively reached out again. Society, we learned, had a short memory when it came to scandals. There would always be newer, more shocking stories to captivate the gossips. We would never be fully accepted again, but we might, in time, find a kind of peace at the edges of respectability. But more than that, we found something better. We found a community of our own making. We hosted small gatherings at Greymore for those who shared our values, who believed that compassion mattered more than pedigree. We supported local charities, particularly those that helped children in difficult circumstances. Catherine, who had suffered so much herself, proved to have a natural empathy for others in pain. She volunteered with the parish to visit families in need, and she used her own experience to comfort children who felt alone or misunderstood. One evening in May, nearly a year after I had first arrived at Greymore, William and I stood in the garden watching Catherine play with the children of one of our tenants. She was teaching them a game, her laughter ringing out across the lawn, and she looked so different from the frightened child I had found in that locked room that I almost could not believe it was the same person. "Do you ever regret it?" William asked quietly, slipping his arm around my waist. "Giving up the life you might have had for this one?" I leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body against mine. "Not for a single moment," I said. "This life, this family, this love, it is more than I ever dreamed of having." He kissed the top of my head. "I wake up every morning grateful that you heard that lullaby," he said. "Grateful that you were brave enough to open that door. You saved us, Emma. You saved Catherine. You saved me. You saved all of us. We saved each other," I corrected. "That is what love does. It redeems. It heals. It makes us brave enough to face the darkness and find the light on the other side." Catherine saw us watching and waved, her smile bright as sunshine, and I waved back. In that moment, I felt a completeness I had never known before. I had come to Graymore as a desperate woman seeking employment, and I had found instead a calling, a family, and a love that would sustain me for the rest of my days. The house that had once seemed like a tomb now rang with life and laughter. The corridors that had echoed with loneliness now carried the sound of Catherine's footsteps, my voice calling to her, William's quiet presence in every room. The third floor, once locked and forbidden, now stood open. The room that had been Catherine's prison transformed into a bright space filled with her artwork and collections. She sometimes went there to remember, to honor the years she had survived, but she did not linger. She had a whole world to explore now, and she embraced it with the fierce joy of someone who knew what it meant to be confined. As for the lullaby, I never heard it again. Catherine no longer needed to sing to herself in the darkness. She had us now. She had a mother and father who loved her, a home that welcomed her, and a future that stretched before her bright with possibility. The song had been her way of surviving, of holding on to hope when everything seemed hopeless. But she did not need it anymore. She had found what she had been singing for all along. She had found love. She had found freedom. She had found home. And so had I. In this strange, beautiful, broken place called Graymore, I had found the family I had always longed for. I had found purpose in teaching a child who desperately needed guidance. I had found love in the arms of a man who desperately needed redemption. I had found myself in the act of choosing courage over fear, compassion over judgment, love over everything else. The world might say we were scandalous. They might whisper about the bastard child and the governess who married a duke. They might look at us with disapproval and pity and scorn. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the life we had built together, the love that bound us, the joy we found in each morning and each evening spent as a family. I had heard a lullaby from a locked attic, and the Duke had begged me not to look for the key. But I had looked. I had searched. I had opened that door despite every warning, despite every fear. And in doing so, I had set us all free. This was our story. This was our redemption. This was our happy ending. Hard won and dearly bought, but ours nonetheless. And as I stood in the garden with my husband's arm around me and my daughter's laughter in my ears, I knew with absolute certainty that I would make the same choice again. 1,000 times over, I would choose love. I would choose courage. I would choose to open that door, because on the other side of fear lies freedom. And on the other side of darkness lies light. And that light, once kindled, can never truly be extinguished. It burns on, steady and true, illuminating the path forward for all who are brave enough to follow it. We were brave enough, and we had found our way home.